Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with me, Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
And today we are reviewing My Courage to Tell, Facing a Childhood Bully and Reclaiming My Inner Child by Laura E. Corbeth.
Goodreads gives it a rating of 3.33 from 3 ratings and 1 review, and Amazon gives it 5 stars from 1 review. This is a relatively new book. It was only published in June of last year, and Sydney gave it 4 stars. And I also gave it 4 stars. So the blurb says, My Courage to Tell is the story of one woman's struggle to overcome a childhood of abuse at the hands of her cruel, bullying brother. Memories of this abuse remain deeply buried until an aunt dies in Manhattan, leaving an estate to Laura Corbeth, must settle with her estranged brother. As she tries to administer the estate, Laura is plagued by symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Suppressed memories start to rise to the surface. Laura begins to remember and to face a childhood of psychological and physical abuse. No cuts, no bruises, no scratches. Her brother was sly, constraining her to spit in her face, lick her, or perform tickle torture. He took pleasure in dominating her and playing on her fears, relishing his control over his younger sibling. His lies and manipulations terrified her. Witnessing his torture of animals left no doubt in Laura's mind that her tormentor would follow through on his threat, that he would kill her if she told. And where were her parents? Rather than investigating Laura's deteriorating situation, they believed their son's continuous lies as he denied his abuse of Laura. When they did catch glimpses of their son's cruelty, they put it down to sibling rivalry. But it was not sibling rivalry, it was ruthless, relentless, psychological and physical abuse. And by not dealing with it, her parents were complicit. Unheard, unprotected, Laura was completely on her own. My Courage to Tell is one of the first memoirs to shine a light on abuse from a sibling's perspective. It also reveals how families that buy into the lies and manipulations, ignore the problems and stonewall, enable the abuser and foster mental illness. Travel with Laura as she uncovers her past, finds the help and courage to face the past and ultimately confront her abuser and her family.
So we were contacted directly by Laura via Twitter. Yay! So if you haven't already, head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast. So we were giving this book for free, so we thought we would let you know up front. But that doesn't mean that we've changed the way that we have reviewed this book. We have done it the same way as all of the other books. So this book goes backwards and forwards in time. So it spends some time in the more recent past, and then it goes back to Laura's childhood, and then it comes back again to how she dealt with her brother. And so the key themes that I picked out of this book was her relationship with her aunt, who is the one who unfortunately passes away in the story, her relationship with her parents, so how Laura and her parents interacted, the emotional neglect that Laura suffers. So remember, this is a memoir, so all of the events that are being written in this book are true, and then her subsequent recovery from her emotional neglect, her relationship with her brother, and also his behaviour and how he interacts with Laura, how she felt growing up, and also I thought it would be interesting and important to touch on the terms that Laura uses through the book. So there are terms such as gaslighting, tickle torture, silent treatment, and flying monkeys. My favourite, I think, out of all of those is flying monkeys, just because I thought it was funny.
I like the gaslighting because it is linked to my favourite black and white movie, Gaslight. So
we'll talk about that in more detail as we go through.
Yeah.
So I hope that gives you some kind of idea of where we might be heading with our discussion today. So we start off the book with Aunt Varna, who is Laura's dad's younger sister, and we get to see her relationship with Laura. We also get an idea of how Varna interacts with her brother, which is Laura's dad, and also what happened during their own childhood. So Laura describes Varna as being a bully towards her younger sister, and she encouraged her older brother, which is Laura's father, to participate in this bullying behaviour.
this helps Laura in a way to see what happened in her own childhood, because she starts to realise and see similarities in the bullying behaviour of siblings towards one. And it also might explain some of the way that her father dismisses what's going on and says that it is sibling rivalry, because
that's
otherwise
what he was used to.
and it's otherwise he's got to justify what he did as something other than sibling rivalry, and maybe link it to actually he was also sibling bullying as well.
So we get some insight into Laura's childhood memories of Varna and how she interacts with Varna, and also how cold Varna generally was to Laura and her brother.
Yeah, she seemed to have no sort of maternal instincts. When they were travelling once and she'd bought them all these presents, but then they didn't all fit in the car, so she dumped them on the side of the road and said they could only pick one and then get back in the car and drive off, and I won't put up with this whining and all of these things. And Laura remembers looking back and seeing those boxes as they drove away.
It would be heartbreaking if you were a child, wouldn't it?
Yeah, when someone's bought you all these gifts and then suddenly you're only allowed the one, and they're left on the side of the road for who knows what.
And it's also this discussion about how Varna is very frugal with her money. So this part of the book is set in America and Canada. So when Laura was a young child, the family emigrated from Scotland over to Canada, and her aunt ends up in Manhattan. And even though she is running around in Porsches, she's a successful woman, she's in the movie business, she still makes a point of ensuring that her money is in some way squirreled away. It's difficult to explain, isn't it? She appears to have all this money, but yet she refuses to spend it, and she asks her parents for money. And I don't know, I just think it's just a way to describe her.
When you go out to dinner with her, she's the one that wants everyone else to pay for her lunch, for her dinner. She asks her parents for money. She lives in her rent-controlled apartment. She buys second-hand clothes and costume jewellery and things like this, and forever is asking and putting pressure on the family, even though she does seem to have money.
Everything she wants.
No one seems to understand where this money's gone. Varna and her dad were very close, even when their parents get divorced. But contact is broken after Vanna has an argument with her father, and they don't speak for 6 months, but then she does visit and she actually stays with Laura.
And that isn't necessarily the best visit. No. So we get to see that in some ways Varna is quite antagonistic all through her life. The way she interacts with her family, the way she interacts with Laura, the way she interacts with Laura's then boyfriend, who then later becomes her husband. It's just the way that it's her personality, I think. It's just the way she interacts with everyone and just how argumentative she can be.
And sadly, when Vanna dies, her body isn't found for some time, so the body has been decomposing. And because she's become a hoarder as well, her apartment is absolutely crammed full of everything you can imagine. And so they can't figure out how they're going to deal with things, what they're going to do, how they're going to deal with the apartment. You can't go through everything that was there, so how do you deal with her estate? And they decide about, to deal with the estate, you can either do it where the family actually becomes the executor and deals with it, or you can go through lawyers. And Laura does take charge and say she'll deal with it, but this is because the lawyers.
And this is because her cousin, who helped Varna do her will and do all of those kind of things, has said to her that Varna wanted you to be the executor of my estate.
Yeah.
And so she is kind of, in some ways, following through with Varna's wishes, but as a result of following through with Varna's wishes, she opens this Pandora's box of emotions and things that she's repressed, and having to deal with her brother again because they can't find the will. And as a result of not being able to find this will, there is issues surrounding who gets what, and her brother demands. And
this does seem like quite a normal family thing to happen during these times. It seems when marriages, funerals, all those things seem to cause a lot of family issues to go on, and arguments and things. But not only does the relationship between her and her brother become strained, she also then starts to remember some of the stuff that happened when she was a child.
Particularly because of the feelings he evokes when she's dealing with him.
Yeah, because she almost becomes, like, all these PTSD emotions come back to her while she's trying to deal with him. So she starts to remember her childhood. So she's kind of reliving that at the same time as dealing with the current brother in his adult form.
And the stresses associated with dealing with him and the stresses of administering someone else's estate. It's just this whole heap of stress placed onto Laura in one go, and she has to deal with it. And so she spends her time speaking to her aunt, who's still in Scotland, saying, look, Varna has passed away. She wants me to administer her will. I think you should think about taking some of this estate, so you could be entitled to some of it. At first, her aunt is like, no, I don't want anything to do with it, because her and Varna weren't necessarily on speaking terms. But Laura encourages her to say, think about your own children. This money could help your family. And in the end, she goes, okay, I do want to participate.
Well, in a way, none of them had a good relationship with her. So
she doesn't sound like she was a particularly easy person to get on with.
No, so the sister, you kind of do see that the cousins and everyone, who no one really gets on with her, so they think, oh, maybe I'm not entitled. Well, actually, none of them felt that way. So maybe we should all have a slice and to even out what's going on. So, but anyway, it starts off with them having to pay the lawyer for the first part of what's going on, because they are doing a lot of the investigation. They've got to prove that she is who she says she is.
And that they are related to Varna.
Because the body is so decomposed, they have to do DNA testing and things. So they have to send kits out to everybody, and the people have to return the kits, and they also have to pay for all of that to happen. And this causes the first, I would say, stress.
I think so, yeah.
Where she has asked her brother for the money and for the DNA kit to be returned, and he makes every excuse under the sun to put off.
His wife didn't send it.
Yeah, it's putting off paying this money.
Really busy,
or sometimes he just says the check is in the post. I've already posted it, but it's all lies. And actually, he hasn't sent it. He hasn't done the DNA thing. He's just not doing the things that he says he'll do. And really, there's no real reason for him not to do this.
There's also no real reason for him to lie about not doing it in the first place.
No, and that's what, first of all, gets her back up. It's not the fact that he hasn't done it. It's the fact that he says that he has when he hasn't, and the fact that he's lying. But as soon as she actually sort of accuses him of lying, then that's where, it starts triggering all these things that happened in the past.
And it's him falling back into his previous behaviours, isn't it? It's him showing again just what he's like in his true colours. And that just makes it even more difficult for Laura to understand. And so I think at this point it would be good to kind of go back to Laura's earlier relationship and what happens in the past in her childhood before we get into what is happening for Laura as an adult now.
Yeah.
So going back to Laura's relationship with her brother, and I think it's going to be a case of us discussing the relationship with her brother and her parents all at the same time. I think it's tricky to distinguish.
But it's very tied together.
Yeah, we can't necessarily talk about them as isolated things. So this will be a bit of a discussion about just the relationship that she had with her family in her childhood.
Yeah.
So this is, again, all from Laura's point of view. And so we find out that Laura comes along to the family, and in some ways the family situation is a little tricky. So her brother has really been staying most of the time with his grandparents. And so that's Laura's dad's mum and stepdad.
Yeah, it's the paternal grandparents.
That's what I was looking for.
Because they needed a babysitter because both parents needed to work. And so the baby lived with them during the week, and at the weekends was home with the parents. So this did cause some confusion because obviously he would be spoiled by the grandparents during the week, and there's one set of rules there, and then at the weekend home with their own parents, but there's another set of rules there. So it must have created some confusion for the brother.
Yeah, and you also have this issue where there is this stage of attachment, isn't there, to primary caregivers. And from what I've read is that he would have this issue where he's probably more bonded to the grandparents than he is to his parents. So when Laura comes along and he's basically taken back by his parents, of course he's going to be upset. They've just taken him away from his grandparents, who he has become attached to.
Yeah, who are basically another set of parents to him. And so when Laura is born, he comes home to live full time. That's going to cause him a lot of anger at his parents, at Laura, the baby that caused
even though it's not her
to
fault.
happen, of course. And so this is probably where Laura pinpoints the animosity starts from, and is grown from that point, because she says that she thinks actually the abuse started right away because her mother is actually mentioned that she caught the brother violently rocking the crib, and she told Laura this later on in their life because they're showing this resentment and this jealousy, and that these should have been warning signs, but it wasn't for them. They just put it down to, it's siblings being siblings.
Which it isn't in this case. And there's also a photo that Laura talks about of her sat next to her brother, and her brother is imminently about to strike her with this rock, and yet the parents take the photo and
keep it.
Yeah, and I don't know what happened next. I mean, Laura is too young to remember what happens next, but she probably just got smacked with a rock.
Yeah.
And what did her parents do to stop it?
And she remembers that whenever he did do anything towards her, it was her word against her brother's, and her mother would always believe her brother, and therefore there was no consequence. There was no one there to support her and to believe what she was saying.
And there was just so many incidences that Laura had repressed. She had not really thought about it over the time. I mean, there's this point where she says, I saw a German Shepherd one time with my mum, and I said I didn't like German Shepherds. I was scared of them. And this is because apparently when she was younger, about 2, she ended up being attacked by a German Shepherd, although we don't necessarily think it was. We think this is her brother lying to her mother.
Well, she ends up with a broken leg, I think,
and no scratch marks,
no
scratches,
bite marks. No bite marks. But apparently it was the dog that did it. But actually,
it's more than likely it's probably her brother.
Yeah, and then blamed the dog because, that's what he did. That's what he always, she said, made sure that whenever he was hurting her, it was enough to hurt her, but never enough to be caught or to be caught out with what he was doing.
Exactly. And she is told, or again, another incident where he goes, this is a bomb, don't move or you're gonna die.
Yeah, he puts it in her bed in the middle of the night and says this is a bomb, and she just... Yeah, she remembers just laying there all through the night.
Being terrified.
Yeah.
And it's also the fact that, as you said, he doesn't leave the marks. He doesn't leave any evidence. And so how do you then prove to someone else that this is happening, particularly when they're in denial?
Yeah.
And in some ways, you're punishing Laura because she can't prove what her brother is doing.
And he's always threatening her. He turns around and says to her, I will kill you if you say anything. And so he's completely threatening her all the time. She's younger, so she is more likely to believe him, but also because she's seen him be violent towards animals and to other people, and therefore she knows, she thinks to herself, I know he will actually follow through with his threat if I do tell.
Exactly. I mean, at one point she talks about remembering catching her brother skinning a frog alive just to see how long it would live.
Yeah. And doesn't he boil something at some point as well? He's boiling an animal, and she's just, I kind of just can't believe the things that...
Particularly with her own relationship with animals. Yeah. It's one of the things that Laura discusses, is it's a way that she deals with some of this kind of hate that she's grown up with and this emotional neglect, is that she has such a affinity with animals that, it's just shocking. And we see this when she talks about her relationship with her own animals later on. And it must have been quite heartbreaking. And I don't know about you, but if I watch a TV programme, kill the people, not a problem. Don't care about the people. Kill an animal, I will switch that programme off. And isn't that just crazy? Am I just weird?
No, it's true. Whenever I am teaching, the same thing happens. I can talk about millions of people dying, but when it comes to when a horse died or a dog, and then suddenly, it's the worst event to have happened ever. So I completely understand that. And so she is really kind to animals. She looks after them. She
has
takes
such a
them in.
nature, doesn't she?
She does. And I think that comes from the fact that to counter what her brother is doing with animals when he is so torturous.
Yeah. And it's just this whole kind of stream of him lying and this uncanny ability to manipulate everyone around him. Even as a small child, is like, oh, it's just him being him, or it's we believe him over you. And
well, she said that he was an amazing liar, and that actually there was two sides to him. So he could be the charismatic, nice, kind, loving person to when he wanted to be,
but then he'd slip something in.
Yeah. And he was able to manipulate and control people. And she felt she was under constant mental torture, absolutely terrified all the time because of what he was saying and doing around. He enjoyed seeing her suffer. And so he was able to, and when he actually did hurt her, he sometimes would laugh and say, even though he's being really cruel.
And he enjoyed that level of control of her.
Yeah.
Particularly from the way that Laura describes the interactions. We can definitely see just how much he's reveling in her situation and the way that she is feeling.
Yeah. And he also says things like, "You're such an idiot," and verbally puts her down all the time, so that when she breaks her collarbone, he just says that she's an idiot, and that even though she's actually in physical pain, and he just laughs and sniggers at her and puts her down. And so you can just see this teasing and pain and torture that means that she is just constantly on alert for something going wrong and something hurting, and she is living under a constant threat.
From her brother.
Yeah.
Someone that should be a loving person towards her,
yeah.
I think. And also the fact that her parents just dismiss everything that she says. They're dismissing her emotions. They're dismissing...
Or they say it's sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
They do the two things. They either dismiss it down to nothingness, just silly brother and sister stuff, or they say, actually, she's the one lying and he's the one telling the truth. And they don't ever really look in or investigate things. She describes how her mother is really she's had quite a sheltered upbringing herself because her mother died when she was quite young. And so, she won't stand up. She doesn't feel strong enough to stand up to her own son. Even when she does later on realise what's going on, because Laura has some piano lessons, and she describes herself as a very introverted, very
withdrawn kind of person, because she is in this constant state of fear, isn't she?
Yeah.
And she's got no one to confide in. Remember, the family has moved from Scotland to Canada. There's no one nearby that she can go, look, this is happening to me.
And she says actually they move a few times within the first sort of 4 years that they're moving around because they're finding the right place and the right jobs and stuff like that. So she hasn't made any friends. She's still quite young to make good friends anyway. And when this piano teacher sort of starts to ask her about things, she starts to open up. But it takes a long time for the piano teacher to get her to a point where she can trust her enough to actually open up about it.
Well, how would you ever feel comfortable in opening up to an adult? The people that are around her are the people that are meant to be keeping her safe, and they're just not doing that. So if you were a child and the adults around you were missing everything and not listening to you, you wouldn't be able to open up. I know I wouldn't be able to.
And this is where, I felt a lot of comparisons in this book to my own childhood.
I thought this one might trigger you a bit.
Yeah, and it was, my siblings bullied me because they were following what my mother was doing. My mother was the bully, and then my siblings
joined in, because that's what you did. Your mum was doing it, so they thought, well, it must be normal behaviour, so therefore I'm going to join in. Which, again, is fair enough. They were kids at the time. The problem is that they still do it now.
Yeah, less so, but
particularly one of them, in comparison.
Yeah, and they were name calling me and things like that. And when I used to tell, it was put down to sibling rivalry. It was put down to, I was different from them, so they never understood me and I never understood them, and then I was the weakling. So whenever we played games together and I would get injured, so I wasn't allowed to play with them because they wanted to play rough and tumble and I'd get hurt.
Yeah,
so you
were the crybaby because you did get hurt.
And so I was segregated from the other two of my siblings, and it was never validated what was going on. And when I remember when I got to year 10 at school, so I must have been 14, I actually did confide in my form tutor about what was going on at home with my mother, and nothing came of it. And she worked at my school. I just remember him being shocked because she was amazing at work. She was always so helpful.
But again,
she was always so kind.
Happens, isn't it? Is that the person that is being abusive has this uncanny ability to hide it from the rest of the world, which we see with Laura. Laura's brother is able to hide the fact that he's abusing her from everyone else. The family itself also hides behind their own facade, and the way that they deal with it, they blame everyone else rather than her brother. So there is times when they go, well, it's because your dad's away all the time that your brother's playing up, and it's just these things that you go, you are the adults in this situation. Yeah, okay, times have changed, and I may be looking at it from a perspective from now. So I'm looking back at this and going, well, this is what we should be doing, and we're better, and we're, those kind of things. I've got a different perspective on it than back then.
Well, I think people may sort of kept to their own business. They didn't think it was their place to tell other people how to be a good parent. And so I think often things that would nowadays be reported to social services
when swept under the carpet.
Yeah, because, and especially as a lot of it was mental and therefore wasn't as recognised. If it was a physical problem, which in Laura's case it was, but in my case, it was rarely.
It was emotional.
Yeah, it was much more emotional. So, those sorts of things weren't taken as seriously. It was kind of, oh, okay, that's what's going on. It's just the dynamics of their family.
But it also, again, comes down to you having to prove to your form tutor that this was happening, because they didn't believe you as the victim.
Yeah, definitely.
In the situation, which is another thing that in this whole thing with Laura, she is trying to prove to her parents that she is being victimised by her brother.
Yeah, because
yet he hides it.
Even when the piano teacher tells her mum,
and they try and catch him.
Yeah,
don't
they want to catch him in the act rather than just believing her and confronting him. The mother doesn't feel she can do that. She's got to get proof, and so
yeah. I understand that there is a need sometimes for proof and stuff, but
some things can't be proven.
Particularly with the way he was doing it. Yeah. I mean, the tickle torture that she talks about, where he would pin her down and incessantly tickle her. And I don't know, is this like...
Or pinning her down and trying to spit in her face and things. I mean, I remember my brother trying to do that, or fart in my face.
Oh, that's a brother thing, isn't it? I don't know.
Well, again, are you putting that down to sibling rivalry? Because actually, I never wanted that. I never did that to him. I never wanted that kind of behaviour.
Why did some boys do that?
Well, I think, again...
Your sister never did that, did she? She never thought that was funny.
I don't remember my sister doing it, no. I remember my brother doing that sort of thing, like trying to sort of spit in my face, and it was a control thing, because you had to pin someone down. And I think the games that even they wanted to play, they would play it and show that I was the weakest, It was...
Were those games encouraged as well by your parents?
Yeah, my dad used to love playing those games. He was the part of it. So there was one game, it sounds ridiculous, but
the swinging game?
Yeah, where my dad literally just made an O with his arms, and then everyone would make an O interlocking, and then he would swing round to see who was the first to fall off, And I was always the first to fall off, and it was always, Becky's going to be first, and Becky's going to get hurt, and then she cried about it. And then my mum would be like, right, we can't play this game anymore. And then they would all blame me because I was the reason they couldn't play, because I was the one that cried.
It's a bit harsh, isn't it, really? Let's be honest. It sounds scary. Don't get me wrong, I understand that when you're kids, you like to play these fun kind of games with your parents. But why do parents feel that they have to, brutalise their kids for a game? Yeah. I mean, the way that, in my family, the way that we show affection, or at least with my dad, is that he hits you and he punches you, and you came to my parents' house and you met my dad for the first time, and he tried it on you and you were like, what the hell?
Yeah, he threw something at me and was like, oh yeah, do this, and
and you were like, excuse me, I've
just met you and you're just calling me this name, and yeah, I was very shocked by that.
I did warn her. There was a lot of warning. I kept going to her, look, my parents, they're odd. And she was like, oh, yeah, it's not a problem.
Well,
and then she walked in and she went, oh, my goodness, I see what you mean now.
Yeah. I mean, we both got very odd parents, but just in very different ways.
Yeah. But, yeah, the way to show affection is to punch someone. And, the pressure point in your knee where you Like, my dad would be forever just grabbing onto my leg and stuff. And he does it now.
And that's an invasion of personal space.
As an adult now, he still tries to do that.
Don't you think that's one of the reasons that we have an issue with personal space?
Oh,
like,
God,
we're not huggy people. Like, we will hug because we have been friends for like 10 years.
Yeah.
But
we don't go and hug like everyone. Oh, look, you're a new person. I'm going to hug you. Yeah,
and it feels weird when I do. Like, I met your friend last night. I gave her a hug, but I was like, yeah, this is weird. I'll give her a hug because it seems the polite thing to do. But I wasn't comfortable. And I think that sort of thing comes down to these early childhood experiences when we're taught that actually almost hugging wasn't the way you showed affection.
No, it was punching, kicking and
playing games and all these kind of stuff.
Getting flung across the room to plough into a wall and collapse in a heap.
Yeah.
Because you were the first one to fly
off. And I
think
Laura sees this as well. Laura is the one that actually doesn't know how to see affection because no one is showing it to her.
No, and it takes for her husband, James, who was her boyfriend at the time that Varna came to stay with her and it was all disastrous. But it takes for him to be there and to have this quote-unquote normal relationship with her, for her to actually finally feel safe with someone and be able to share her feelings with someone else.
Which I think is one of the reasons why she doesn't face up to what happened in her childhood until a much later point, because she
feels safe now.
Yeah, and she has to wait until she feels safe before she can explore what's happened.
Fair enough. Again, it's something that if you have had these bad childhood memories, then you do need to feel safe as an adult before you can get into it. Otherwise, and you have to be open to be able to explore these things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just never going to work.
Yeah. So her childhood is just completely overshadowed by this brother and the relationship that he has formed, with her, where he is controlling, he is intimidating her, he's verbally abusing her, physically abusing her, and her father is absent most of the time because he's having to work and go away. So it's really only the mother that you hear about being on the scene.
And that must have been difficult at the time because, let's be honest, I don't know how single parents do it. I think they're amazing because it's tough. It's not easy. And then you have this denial in what is happening in your house. It just makes everything even worse.
Yeah, so we really sympathise with what Laura had to go through. And so it's amazing, really, that she finds the relationship she does with her husband and actually is able to be successful in her work. But I think that's partly because she's always trying to prove herself better. And we know that, from growing up in families where you are the one put down, you then sort of almost
never feel
counterproductive because you end up trying to prove yourself over and over again to the people around you that you are good enough and you are worthwhile and you are better.
Exactly.
But for her, and I mean for us even, it does create very successful ventures sometimes. What we do, we almost put 100% in completely because we want to do our best to show and to prove that we are, worthwhile. And so because of that, I think that she has actually got to quite a nice place in her life when it comes to her husband and her work. But then she talks about how her health has suffered as well.
Yeah, definitely. So as a result of her re-engaging with her brother, she ends up in the hospital due to significantly high blood pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, the ambulance crew turn up, they pick her up, they
don't know how she's not dead.
No, exactly. And this is all because of the stress and the lies and all of those behaviours that we've talked about are coming back in, and they're causing Laura to relive everything in the past. And that must be horrendous.
And we know we've both got very long-term illnesses. And I know from mine, which is fibromyalgia, there is actually studies out there that believe the link to childhood trauma making the brain develop in a different way, so that my association with pain through my brain's development is different to the other people around me. And therefore now I feel too much pain in my body, maybe because of the painful childhood I was living through. So there is a link between long-term health conditions and childhood trauma.
Yeah, so it is pretty impressive that Laura hasn't ended up in a worse position, even though she is going in and out of hospital because of high blood pressure.
Yeah.
There could be this continued pain, and she doesn't seem to, when she goes to her psychologist, she doesn't seem to be in a place where she is having some of her own mental health issues.
No, she does say that she does suffer from like a PTSD,
Which
so
is
she's
fair
having
enough.
these flashbacks to her childhood later on. She is having the anxiety and the stress, and she doesn't necessarily know what it's linked to, but she's having those feelings, and it's only when she starts to explore it she realises it's because it's a flashback to her childhood.
Yeah. And so just quickly kind of rounding up the childhood part of the book, we have the fact that it starts to get better for Laura when her brother leaves home.
Yeah.
So once he's out of the situation, Laura flourishes. And the way and the changes that people see in her behaviour and how she comes across to other people is just incredible. And this is purely because her brother's left.
Didn't you find that when you moved out of home and wasn't surrounded by your parents all the time? I definitely found when I moved out that I was able to be more of me. I mean, I don't think I've been truly me until maybe the last few years where I've been dealing with things, but
I think that's interesting. Yeah.
I definitely felt that I left home at 17 to try and get away from my mother.
Me too.
And so I could start to sort of build a life and a personality beyond the introverted, withdrawn child that I was.
I think for me, I still struggle with identifying who I am now.
Yeah.
I think that getting out of the situation was a good thing for me. However, I don't necessarily think I was able to develop a sense of self. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Because I think I definitely maybe became more confident.
I didn't. See, when I don't know, I think this might be either because of my borderline personality, because it would have originated back then. But I don't know. I don't necessarily think that I was able to get past where I was emotionally stunted.
Yeah.
So you moved out and you moved in with a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And I know that I keep going on about boyfriends and that it makes things worse and difficult and stuff. I moved out and I moved in with my grandma. And I think that might be the difference, is because in some ways she can be quite
She kind of
difficult.
Perpetuated some of it.
Yeah, because she has her own set ways.
What about when you went off to university?
Again, I don't necessarily think I got an identity for myself.
Yeah.
I still kind of
sort of copied the people around you. Yeah.
So I was more like, if they were going out, I would go out, but I wouldn't necessarily enjoy it.
Yeah.
Or if someone was doing something, I would go along with it. I wouldn't necessarily
make
think
your own
that
choices.
was me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I had the opportunity to make my own choices, I don't think I necessarily had the strength to do it.
That. I mean, me moving in with my boyfriend was more because I wanted to get out, and then them offering me the place to, and then me trying to remain in that relationship was me trying to be the person that he wanted, because otherwise it meant going back. So I think that I agree with you. Finding your own choice after that is difficult. But
I think you were more successful than I was.
Yeah, well, mine wasn't as, I didn't lead me to having something like borderline personality disorder. So I was more aware of my emotions and my ability to maybe deal with them in some way myself. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. It makes sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to you guys out there, let us know and we'll try to explain it in a different way. Yeah. It's quite difficult sometimes to articulate what it is that we're thinking and feeling, particularly when it's a kind of a question out of the blue, really, in some ways.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've probably not even thought about
it's something
those years.
Yeah, or like Laura, it's something that we've kind of blocked out in some respects. I know that
I don't feel like it's almost like the person that moved out of my parents' house was a different person to the person sitting here now, like a completely different person.
Yeah, I definitely think that I share that view, is that I definitely feel completely different to what I did back then, but yet my old coping mechanisms that I used continued. They didn't go away. Yeah. Does that make sense? So, I mean, my mum told me that my stepdad hit her. So I got so drunk on vodka because I was just swigging it out of the bottle. And that was in my first year of university. So if there was a different coping mechanism, maybe it would have been better for me, but I fell back into those old ways of coping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I didn't know any other way.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, it's not the first time that he did things like that, and it will probably not be the last time. I mean, I've had phone calls in the middle of the night because he's left her in the middle of a night out, and some awful things that he's done to her. And I'm the one that ends up picking up the pieces. And this was even when I was 16. So initially, when I moved out of home, I moved in with my mum. And then we had a big argument because my stepdad was extremely rude and horrible to my mum. And so she got drunk. And so obviously I've learnt that that's how you deal with your problems, is you get completely drunk and it's all fine. At 17, I was holding my mum's hair back while she was puking into a bucket because of something my stepdad had done. And so you kind of go, well, I really had no hope when you think of it like that.
What they say, out of the pan into the fire or whatever it is.
So I kind of left one horrible situation into another horrible situation. And whilst I'm so thankful to my grandmother for taking me in and looking after me during the time between the end of college and university, so I think I was with my grandma for about 6 to 7 months, there was this issue where things didn't necessarily change.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were further away from your family. When you left them. They were over there. They weren't with you. Whereas for me, I kind of just went from one to the other and kind of bounced around. And we see with Laura that she comes out of her shell. Her brother goes, he's out of the house, and she becomes the person that she is today. She starts to flourish.
Yeah. And we see that in that she's got a good career. She has a lovely husband that's supportive.
Wonderful son.
Yeah, wonderful son as well. And that probably moves us to when her aunt dies. She has to pick up this estate that we were talking about and dealing with the estate. And this is when she starts suffering with all the stress and she's getting hospitalised. And she
realises her brother's manipulations
and
things are coming back in, aren't they? They're creeping back in. She has to deal with him, and he starts to gaslight her. So I think at this point I'll get you to explain gaslighting, because you've obviously seen the film. I haven't seen the film. She keeps telling me I should, so I'm probably going to go home and watch it now. But gaslighting is a particular psychological phenomenon that people use to get control of a situation, isn't it?
It's where somebody actually tries to make you think that you are making up and you are crazy because of things that are going on. So in the film, the husband is, making the gaslights go up and down.
Really?
And so she says this, and then he goes, no, that's not happened. And she's like, but it did happen. And so it's making her feel that her memories and her experiences are flawed. And so it makes you think that you are the insane one and the other people are the same ones. And actually it's your perspective and your experiences that are either wrong for one reason or another. And so that's what happens in the film. And I know that myself. My sister still will not accept that what happened to me in my childhood was any different to what happened to her in her childhood.
And the fact that she also says that you victimise her for some reason. I don't quite understand how that comes about in the way that she perceives things.
And so she changes every situation around, just like my mother does as well, that actually we're the ones bullying my mother. So when, as a child, I would start trying to stand up for myself and what was going on, and others would, like my dad might join in with me and my brother, and then my mum would be like, well, you're ganging up on me, you are the one, that's not happening. And so there's a denial of what's happening, so you think that what you believe you've experienced isn't right, but then also it's your feelings they're not being validated, you're being told that you are wrong. So you start to question that actually, did what you think happened? And because, we all know that childhood experiences are a mixture of what we've experienced and we remember, but also what we've been told. So there is a level of me going, well, did it really happen like that?
Oh, yeah.
Should I feel like that was wrong? Is it, and I often come to you and I say, look, this has happened. Is this right? Like, is this wrong? And I often am not sure whether my memories are real or not, because I was told that they weren't valid and I was perceiving things in the wrong way. And Laura finds this. So when she does say, well, you lied to her brother, for example, about the check, he then goes, no, I didn't say that. And so she then doubts herself, even though she's got text messages, she's got emails, she knows her own memory, but he still makes her feel like she isn't telling the truth herself.
And I think it gets to the point where Laura, I think this is fantastic that Laura decides to do this. She goes, look, I'm not going to communicate with you via the telephone. I'm going to communicate with you via email. It means that then she then has this written evidence to show what her brother is saying and the manipulations that he's trying to get in there.
And I think she has to do that, because otherwise this gaslighting takes
continue.
over,
Exactly.
and then she will doubt herself. And this is the problem, is actually, even when she's got her husband listening in to the conversation, she still sort of almost believes her brother sometimes when he says, no, that didn't happen that way, and it's not like that.
Yeah.
And
he keeps accusing her of wanting the money when actually it's him that wants the money. And she knows it's him that wants the money because he keeps emailing her about it and stuff.
Yeah, but she keeps going, well, am I coming across that way? Have I dealt with this in the wrong way? Have I done this, that and the other? Or is it that I'm being perceived like that? And so it's a lot of doubt about yourself and about your memories and experiences, which, you know, is the foundation of who we are. And so you question your own being.
Yeah, and he also goes behind her back. That's the thing that really surprised me, that he was so manipulative that he actually approached the lawyer himself. And the lawyer contacts Laura going, your brother's been on the phone, he seems really nice and stuff. But he deliberately manipulates everyone in that situation.
Well, this is the flying monkeys.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the term that you love, the flying monkeys.
This is my favourite term.
And this is where narcissists actually use other people to do their dirty work, to actually support the abuse that they're doing. So they actually, him telling this person what she had said, the lawyer, means that the lawyer then comes to her and then says, well, what's going on? And questions her experiences and her feelings again. So he's getting other people to do his gaslighting and getting them to try and support his view all the time.
Exactly. So he manipulates his own mother to do this. He also manipulates their cousin to do this.
When she tells him in confidence, like, I don't know, I can't remember the exact situation,
so
but
it's
something.
This situation where she says that she was unsure that her cousin David had given Varna the correct support during the process of the will writing and storing the will and stuff. And her brother goes to him and just tells him everything. And you kind of go, when she tells her brother this in an email, she's like, oh no, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. But she then doesn't expect something that she said in confidence to someone to end up in someone else's.
It's just a private worry or a private little rant, you know, like we all do it. We all rant to somebody. And then if that person wanted to, they could go and harm your relationship. That. Yeah, I have had that.
And she continues to deny that she did it, even though there is proof that she specifically tried to manipulate the situation to make me look bad. And don't get me wrong, I should have probably gone to my sister in the first place and explained the situation. However,
you should be able to tell your friends how you're feeling.
One of my best friends shouldn't have gone to my sister going, this is what your sister is saying about you.
Yeah. And then deny it and said that that's not what happened, even though your sister, the one that heard it, is the one that goes, yes, you did.
Yeah. And also then tells you that she was in a different room and she never said anything and it wasn't her fault. And I told her, I went, look, you threw me under the bus. And she turned around and said, no, I didn't. And I was like, yes, you did.
Yeah.
And it was probably that was the worst thing out of everything.
Well, that's the gaslighting.
Is that what it...
That's the gaslighting. Right, She's making you...
I felt like I was the one.
Yeah, are you the one doing something wrong? Are you the one that actually didn't believe or shouldn't have done things and stuff like that? Yeah. That's the making you feel like you're the one that's insane.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I probably should have gone to my sister and explained the situation to her. However, I didn't want to cause an argument, so I needed to vent at someone.
Yeah.
And instead of her saying, look, it's too much, please don't use me as a way to vent, could you use someone else?
Yeah.
For example. She didn't. She just went and told my sister.
Yeah.
She didn't tell my sister. She allowed my sister to read the messages.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, when we were in our vent, we wouldn't necessarily word it the way that we would talk to the person that we were talking about if we even wanted to tell them.
Yeah, and let's be honest, when I get angry, I get angry.
Yeah, and sometimes you just need that vent, and that's it. You move on. You don't necessarily need to tell the person that what's going on.
And I'm still learning how to tell people when I am upset.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's either I'm fine or it's this giant eruption where I'm trying to kill people and there's nothing really in between. And I'm going back through the interpersonal effectiveness where I have to use these different techniques and skills to explain to someone how they make me feel.
Yeah.
However, that's difficult. It's not an easy process. And for someone who's not used to it, and it's even harder when it's family because they're used to you in the way that you were before.
Yeah. And we also, I think Laura wants a better relationship with her brother.
But he's the one that's not cooperating.
So she tries to, share with him and to rant
keep
about these people and have that, open relationship. But then she has to guard herself because otherwise he then uses it against her.
As a manipulation.
And to manipulate the other people around to make her seem, he wants to turn others against her so that he's got more people on his team because numbers mean something. So, for example, I'm in a family of 5 people. If you take my mum, my dad and my 2 siblings and me. So when there's 4 people telling you, no, that's not the case compared to you, you would believe it. So he wants more people on his side saying she's the one that's the problem because the more people that think that are on his side makes her feel more of the insane one.
Yeah. I think there's this one part in the book, and I know, as we say, this is a true story, and I think that for Laura, this must be one of the most difficult things. She says she forgives her parents, which is fantastic, so she's like, I can move on from this, and yes, this happened in the past, but I do forgive you. But her mum still remains in denial to this day. And I think we keep having this discussion, particularly with our parents. So Becky has been trying to build her relationship with her mum, but yet she at times just doesn't fully comprehend what happened or agrees to what happened.
So I think I've now got to the point where I realise that she is never going to understand fully what happened. She doesn't have the ability to, or the emotional intelligence to understand what she put me through. And at the end of the day, I don't need her to because I know what happened, no matter what they tell me, and I know how I feel about it. And that's all I need. And
this is the same for Laura, isn't it? She tells, or she tries to explain to her mum how manipulative her brother is and the things that he's doing to manipulate her and that he is mentally ill. And we don't necessarily get a diagnosis for him. There is suspicion that he has some kind of narcissistic personality disorder or something along those lines, but without being properly diagnosed by going to a psychologist, which he will never ever do.
No, narcissists, this is the problem with narcissism. Is
they don't think there's a problem.
You don't think there's a problem. They're not ever convinced that they could be the problem, which is the other issue, which is what I believe. My mother is a narcissist, and now my sister. And so there isn't any help for them. So for the people around them, you have to accept that they are the way they are. But what Laura does and what I'm having to do is you have to then just not accept the behaviour as it happens from now on.
So in your case, it's the particular behaviour from your mum and your sister. And in Laura's case, it's not accepting the behaviour that she's seeing from her brother.
And even her mother, because even with her mother...
she's in denial, isn't she?
Yeah, but with her mother, where her mother sort of says to her, yes, I believe you, I agree with you.
But then goes and has
his
way back in, doesn't he?
Yeah, and so
Weasels.
So she stops that cycle by sort of saying, okay, well, I'm going to actually not cut all ties with her mum, but she does actually stop communicating with her about her brother.
And radically accept that things aren't going to change. Her mother is never going to necessarily agree with Laura's point of view on the situation. And that's so difficult. And even now, I find that particular skill, so in DBT that is known as radical acceptance, I find it so difficult to radically accept that if I went to my parents and told them these things, they wouldn't understand.
Yeah. I still find it hard. I have accepted it, but I have to remind myself I've accepted it.
That's
if that
another
makes
thing
sense.
that you do in DBT.
Yeah, you have to keep going with it. You have to...
Going back. No,
Yeah.
I accept that this is the way it is.
Yeah, and you have to learn not to expect more, but to also not to put up with worse. So when they are behaving the way that you don't like, that is when you have to stand up to them and say, no, I don't accept this behaviour. You are doing this, this and this. And Laura does this by writing a letter to her brother.
She confronts him, doesn't she?
Yeah.
She's like, look, this
and
is
she
what's
actually sends
happened.
copies of the letter to his children
His wife.
and his wife, and her mother, all explaining so everyone knows kind of where they stand. And just to say, look, this is what you did to me, and this is what it is. And I think she feels it helps with the acceptance, because again, it's putting an end to the gaslighting and saying, on black and white, here on a piece of paper is my evidence of what you did to me. This is what I believe happened, and this is my account of what happened, and that means something, and you should know what happened from my point of view. And so that writing that account and sending that off, I think is...
How brave is that?
Well, this is, I was going to say, this is where I think the title really comes into it.
My
courage to tell. And it's that moment where she actually sends that letter off, and not just to him, so he can't manipulate it. She sends exactly the same thing to his children and his wife, and whether they choose to accept it or not,
that's their issue, I guess.
But she has laid her case down in front of them, and this is what he is like, and this is what's going on. And that's where she can then step away and say, right,
I've done as much as I can.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the fact that I'm a bit like, there must be more that I can do. I must be able to fix this situation. But I guess that probably comes back to my own issue with defectiveness and failure. So
yeah, and to be honest with you, it's only through my work at making myself feel that I am worth something have I been able to accept that I don't have to prove myself to my parents and to my siblings and things like that. It's only by having other people who have validated what I've said and agree with what happened that actually helps me to go through it, which is why I'm quite open about my childhood and what happened. And part of that is because I feel I need to tell my story to make it valid. If I don't tell it and it's just in my head, to me, I won't ever know if it's true. It's a bit like, and we live in Surrey in England, and there's this road that I was driving down with my sister-in-law, and I suddenly almost had a flashback. And we were driving towards, and there's this really sharp bend, literally is 90-degree bend, where this wall is. And for years, I'd had this nightmare about driving towards this wall, and then suddenly it was in front of me, and we're actually in a car in real life, and I was just like, oh my god, there's this wall,
it's real,
it's not a dream. And then my brother now tells me that actually this wall was about when I was in the car with my nan, and she was a terrible driver, and
good job she's not around at the moment to hear you say that.
No, she was a terrible driver, and we were doing this where you drive around and get clues and you go to a new place, and we were doing like a treasure hunt in the car for part of this disability club that she belonged to. And my brother remembers this, and I was like, all I remember is driving towards this wall and being absolutely petrified we were going to drive into this wall. And now I know where this wall is. It's hilarious. But it's those things that actually I'd convinced myself that was in my head.
And you made it all up.
Yeah. And I didn't know the wider story. All I could remember was this
scary wall. This wall of death.
And I think for Laura, it's that once she has it on that bit of paper and she sends it off, I think she feels that her story is out there. And I think one of the reasons why she writes this book is her story is out there, and therefore it is valid.
Yeah. And as it says in the book blurb, this is the first book that has really addressed this issue of sibling on sibling abuse. I've not seen anything else out there that has talked about sibling on sibling abuse. And yeah, it's just extremely interesting, just this whole entire book. And what I would love to do is maybe we can arrange this is to speak to Laura to see how she felt about writing this book and how it has helped her, if it has.
And even how she approached it. Because the book, we really love the book, and we think it's really brave of her to write her story, and we have enjoyed reading it. The one thing I would criticise is it's quite repetitive and it jumps around, which is part of the way she remembers it and the story that's being told and how it comes back to her.
But is a little confusing, perhaps, to the reader.
So I wonder how she approached writing it and whether it is just a chronological through those more recent times that then flash back to the past as she went through it, or whether she did sort of write things down, make a plan of it, you know, and whether it could have been reorganised in a different way. But the story itself is an amazing account of
her life.
Yeah, and of the abuse that she went through. I almost wonder if it should have been sort of a story of her childhood and then a story of her adulthood. But I don't know, you know,
it would be
whether that's because we
rearrange it.
Yeah.
We've been reading so many of these recently. I think it would be tricky to rearrange and get it in an order.
Yeah.
That would be a bit different. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
We think the story itself and the courage to write this book and to put it out there is really important. And I think it's raising these issues that a lot of people probably have dealt with. I know I have dealt with some of the same issues in this book. I wasn't as physically abused as Laura was, but the mental abuse. I know there's a particular bit in the book where she talks about that thing people say that sticks and stones will break your bones.
But
and
names
words
can never hurt you.
Will never hurt you.
Words can never hurt you.
Yeah, and to me, when she was saying how ridiculous that is,
we were like, hell yeah, that's ridiculous.
And I still hear it as a teacher. People still say this. And I'm like, well, no, actually, mental damage can have a much bigger effect. A broken leg will heal, you know, but...
Unless it's really bad.
Well,
and then you...
But you know, generally, a broken bone will heal. But actually, the mental scars that I suffered as a child...
are still here now.
I'm still dealing with.
20 years later.
Yeah. And I have only been able to properly address them in the last couple of years, you know, and through 3 years of therapy, I'm still dealing with them and still coming to acceptance. So I actually think that it should be, you know, sticks and stones break your bones, and words are really hurtful.
Oh, I like that.
So it should be. Actually, that
I think you
worse.
should repeat that.
So sticks and stones will break your bones, but words are really hurtful.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I do like that.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So anyway, really great book overall.
I think the last thing that I'd like to come on to really is the bit where Laura sees a psychologist and she's working through this. Yeah. So it's her discussion of how she's working through this entire process, which also might be another reason that prompted this entire book. Her psychologist and she work very closely together, and Laura comes up with something that I had never heard of before, and that is where she's getting in touch with her inner Laura, so her little Laura, and she writes with her non-dominant hand, and she talks to her through her non-dominant hand. What did you think of that? I'd never heard of this before.
I have never heard of this. I can't write with my other hand, so I think I'd find it very, very difficult to be able to do it. Reading it, I felt quite strange about it, but it reminded me about what things you told me about your inner child being validated.
Yes.
And so it reminded me of the therapy that you've had, just in a slightly different form.
Yeah, so I have schema therapy, and in schema therapy basically it breaks you down into several different parts, and one of those is your angry child, and your vulnerable child, and your happy child, and your impulsive and undisciplined child. And all of those are part of you. And it's getting in touch with that side of things. So for Laura, in terms of schema therapy, her vulnerable child hasn't had its needs met. And so in schema therapy, what happens is that when I'm sat with my therapist, we have this thing where the therapist is that child's parent and then meets that parent's needs, so you reparent the situation.
Which I think that in a way that's what Laura is doing by
getting in touch with her little Laura.
Giving little Laura a voice, which she didn't have before. And then she's writing back saying, your voice is heard, I am still here, I am supporting you, I am your, being the parent that she should have had when she was a child.
Exactly. Also in schema therapy, the whole idea is that at some point, fingers crossed, I'll be able to take on that role myself.
Yeah.
So when we do something called imagery, And so what happens is that you recall a situation that is similar to the situation you're in now. So, for example, if someone has upset me, I then sit and I come up with an image of me when I was a child under the age of 10. And we go through the process and we find out what it is that my inner child needs.
Because it's triggered something from then.
Exactly.
And so you're almost reliving the same experience with the person that you have now.
Yeah, and the therapist can step in to help. She's like, what is it that you need right now? And sometimes all I need is a hug.
Yeah.
Or all I need is for someone just to go, I understand.
I'm listening.
Yeah, I am here for you.
Yeah.
And these things, really, when you talk about this out loud, it sounds really silly, I think.
No.
But it's, eventually I'll be able to do that myself. My own healthy adult will be strong enough to go, hang on a minute, you're getting carried away.
And this is where I think, because Laura is ahead of the game than you are, because she doesn't have the borderline personality disorder you have, I suppose she's already at that stage where she can be the parent. So she is writing
to herself backwards and forwards.
Yeah, which eventually, we hope you'll get to. But at the moment, your therapist is doing the writing back almost.
Yeah, so she is being the healthy me.
Yeah. Whereas, Laura is able to do that.
Yeah.
I've not done anything like this, but that sort of thing before, but it's something my psychologist has mentioned a couple of times.
Imagery.
Yeah, but whether we should role play some of the situations I dealt with as a child, but we'll see. We'll see what we come up with later on. But I thought it was a really good way for Laura to
get in touch with that inner vulnerable part of herself.
Because you can't go back and change the past.
Yeah, the past is the past. What you can do is just find a better way of dealing with it in the present.
Yeah. And realise that if these things had been done, you would feel differently now. And so helping you to feel differently now by acknowledging those mistakes in the past that your parents did because they didn't validate or didn't
step in and help. Exactly. Yeah. So another thing is that when I am with my therapist, she is like, what is happening? What is your dad saying? And I'd be like, this is what he's saying. And she's like, what do you need? I'm like, I need my dad just to go away. And she physically is like, right, okay, you're out. And she literally opens the door and throws him out the door in my imagination. But the door, she does get up and open the door and shoos him out.
Yeah.
But it's just having someone on your side to back you up. And this is something that Laura's parents should have been doing.
And probably, especially if your imagination isn't great, writing might be a better way to sort of, come up with it. Maybe you don't feel as silly, maybe.
Maybe, yeah, you're a bit more emotionally repressed. Whereas I have this issue where my emotions are just constantly heightened in comparison to other people's that may be at a more level playing field. But then you've also got people that have issues with limited emotions and not being able to feel their emotions. So in some ways, for me and my husband, I've got all of these emotions boiling around and he is having issues trying to identify the emotions. You have this disconnect, and I don't necessarily think that he would be able to do imagery like I am at this point in time. But maybe he would find it easier and a bit more obvious by writing with his non-dominant hand to his inner child. I don't know. I've not even brought it up.
I suppose it's just lots of different ways of trying to do the same thing.
Well, I guess
depending on the person. Because, for example, when I did we were trying to describe what my anger was like inside, and I find that really hard. But I could draw it. So I painted a picture of what my anger looked like inside.
And I guess in some ways, psychology is overlapping. Like all these different psychological theories overlap in some way, because we are just people, if that makes sense. So there's going to be things that help some people, there's going to be things that aren't helpful for some people.
And your personality traits and the things that you are good at will help you to get into the issues you've got to deal with. And obviously Laura is a writer. She writes this book in a very good way. So writing maybe was her way out. You is the imagery. For me, it was painting. For someone else, it might even be something else, make a model of it. I don't know. But it doesn't matter how. It's what you're getting to. And actually that you are validating that inner child that was vulnerable and didn't get the validation they needed at the time. So I think that's, what Laura puts across as another way of being able to do that in a way that I think is really inventive. And she puts them at the back of the book so you can read
see
them.
Pictures and things.
And I think that was really amazing to see. And it's not something I've tried, but it did make me think maybe I should try this. So it was really nice to see a different way of doing things.
Yeah. So I think that kind of summarises or brings us to the end, really, of our discussion on My Courage to Tell by Laura. So
thank you so much to Laura. We do really appreciate you sharing your story.
And reaching out to us.
Yeah, we say again, this isn't a fiction book. This is a factual book based on her memoirs or her life. And so thank you. And it definitely pulled a few strings with me and reflected some of the things that happened in my childhood.
Same for me.
Yeah, and helped me sort of get to I read this while I was going through a lot of anxiety and family issues.
And I did say at one point, you don't have to push yourself to get through this book if it is causing too much distress.
But at the same time, it helped actually validate maybe some of the things that I had gaslighted to me and the flying monkeys around my mother. And I think those things that Laura was talking about helped me to validate that actually my story is true, and I don't have to accept that other people might think that it's not true as the truth instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
It's all right,
It was a bit round the houses.
I think we get the point.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Laura. And it's okay not to be okay. And if you're not okay,
talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116-123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next podcast will be an interview with a secret psychiatrist about emotional abuse, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and PTSD. Our next book will be Finding Audrey by Sophie Kinsella. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. We are now on Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/MHBC to donate as little as $2 a month to that Mental Health Book Club podcast. As a result of your donation, you will get early access to some of our episodes, you will get specific episodes that are only for patrons, and you'll be eligible to be entered into free prize draws.